I'm Denise Gallo, and for the next hour or so, I'm still your president, and then I'm going to toddle off. But I do want to tell you that this session is sort of a catch-all session about Custodia, about which you've heard much these past 2 days. I met with, I don't know, maybe almost 20 people in sessions one-on-one, and Custodia is a one-on-one deal for the most part, although I do help some groups. And I now have a helper. Lisa Gibbons is coming on with me, so we'll have 2 people to do Custodia consultations for you. The scope of the situations, and I'm not going to call them problems because they're not, the scope of the situations of the folks that I met with is phenomenal, from people who are really confused about what to do next to people who are in such good shape that I just sort of sat there and said, why are you here? But what's good about it is that now I can start to piece people together. Oh, we know somebody that's in exactly the same boat as you are, so get in touch with this person. But remember, Custodia is your representative. We are the ones who are telling you what to do or making suggestions what to do if you're considering moving or closing. We're not going to tell you how to do it. We're going to tell you what you might want to consider. So that's what we do. Now, we've got a panel that I think is kind of interesting. When I started with Custodia, the general theory was never put your stuff with an archdiocese, never put your stuff with a school. And when I started interviewing people and seeing some of the solutions they had, I thought, oh no, that's very wrong. Some of those are the absolute perfect places to put things. So I got some people together to talk to you, and these are the folks that are going to be speaking with you. Sister Janice Farnham from my home team now, the Religious of Jesus and Mary. She's our historian, and she is going to talk about a wonderful thing which she thought up a few years ago, and she'll explain that, about moving the RJM collections to Assumption College, which is a great spot for us. And I do have to say that one of the things about her that I think is the most phenomenal is she taught James Martin in seminary. So Sister Mary Navarre, who we're going to swear in as the new secretary, she is the director of archives of the Dominican Sisters of Grand Rapids, and she's going to give a sort of précis of the BC conference for those of you who might not have been able to go. And then finally, Charlene Martin, who is the archivist for the Sisters of St. Francis of the Newman communities, and she is starting this initiative for a TORS, or Third Order Central Archives, and actually I represent Custodia on that little group, so it's not a little group, it's a big group, but I represent them and sort of serve as an ear for them. So let's get going. We're going to ask them to speak about 10 minutes apiece, then we'll open it up for questions, and then we'll move to the business meeting. So first, Sister Janice. Do you want to come up here?
I never met a microphone I didn't like. And I know this is the worst possible time to bring together people for a meeting or a class or anything. So feel free to nod. The information will be sent to you. I am delighted to be on this panel, but I have to say, I guess I would describe myself as a friendly, supportive interloper at this meeting, because I'm not an archivist. You know that Dee is now our archivist. I'm a historian, but we all know that. There's a symbiosis between historians and archivists. We can't do our work of history without the archives. Archivists are essential to historians, and hopefully our work as historians is helpful to you because we provide you with elements of the story. So I'm happy, delighted to be here, and so interested in seeing the dynamic of the population and also the dynamic of what the topics have been. How we're moving away into the digital age. And as Dee just said, look what happens when you Twitter a photo or two. Dee asked me to present, as she said to you, very briefly, our proposal to transfer our collection, our whole collection eventually, to a Catholic college. In our case, Assumption College in Worcester, Massachusetts. The background for this is that I retired from teaching in 2011, and I was tasked with doing what many people in retirement do, who are historians, writing the history of our sisters in this country. We're an international congregation. We have provinces all over the world. We're in 28 countries. We have a general archive in Rome. But as far as our province archive goes, let's say the United States province, which is what we are now, I would describe the archival collection as having been a wandering collection, or if you will, a migrant collection. It moved. It moved very often unwillingly from one place to another, from one state to another, from one region to another. This is not good for archives, but it is what it is, so we deal with it as it is. In 2016, I got an attack of very disabling sciatica, which I'm sure many of you can understand and sympathize with, and I had time on my hands because I couldn't do very much. And I had time to think about the question that had really been bothering me about the future of our story. Like so many congregations, we are getting smaller, older, and in a few years we will bring our mission work in this country to completion. But what will be left of us will be the documents, the legacy of that heritage. And where was that going to go? What was going to happen to it? And so my concern was I wanted to find a permanent home. That's okay, I don't need that now. A permanent place for our archive, something that would be safe, but also that would be open to scholars to use. We might not be here, but our story would continue to be here. And as we all know, the history of women religious is a history that intersects with a lot of other history. The history of education, or the history of nursing, institutional histories, ethnic histories, the histories of the marginal people to whom and with whom we found ourselves when we first came. All of that is of interest, as we just heard from Dee. It continues to be of interest, and when we are no more physically, it will still be even of more interest. So what were the challenges? Well, I said this wandering kind of pilgrim archive, first of all, moved from New England to New York to Maryland, where it stayed for 35 years, to DC when we closed the provincial house in Maryland, and then from 1991 to 2007, it was just located wherever the province leadership team was, if there was room. This was not a good thing. So during that ailment that I had, I began to consider, well, way back, even before, in 2007, so more than 10 years ago, I had approached the French Institute, which is called at the Dalzan Library at Assumption College. Why? Because when our sisters first came, we came for French-Canadian immigrants, and we came to New England, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, primarily. And I figured, well, we have a connection. So let me see if they wouldn't take at least our historical collection. That would be about half of our collection. Everything from 1877 to 1968, when we became one province. We did enter into an agreement. It was an agreement for a permanent loan, and that move took place in 2007. So when I was considering what's going to happen to the rest of the collection, I thought, why not go back and check with the French Institute and see if we cannot come up with a proposal that would be a joint project, good for the college and good for us. So I'm just going to read very briefly what we presented. How's my time? 3 minutes, okay.
We'll have questions later.
Yeah. So we did that, and then we had a meeting in September of 2016 with the interested parties at Assumption, including the president, the CFO, the head librarian, the head archivist. We were about 15 people around the table. A representative from our leadership team, our archivist at the time, Sister Doris, and myself. And we presented the proposal. We had it written, we had it approved by our leadership team, and they said, we are interested. However, as always, here are some of the challenges. Personnel, always a challenge. Where are we going to get the people to oversee this? Secondly, costs. If you're going to need more shelving space, if you're going to need certain things, if you want to be working with us, if you want us to get grants, this is something you have to start thinking about. Are you going to give your collection to us, in which case it becomes our property? How will that work? So these were all parts of the discussion that we had. And then, of course, as always, space. Where will we house this collection? The Dalzahn Library is not a vast library. And like all libraries, it's running out of space. So what to do, what to do? That's when we began to think one thing that we can do, our province, is to hire an archivist who really knows about these things. And our sister Doris had already been in touch with Dee, who was working with Custodia. And so it's thanks to Custodia and to Dee's being a consultant to us over the past 2 years that we got to hire her. It's also thanks to the fact that she and her husband were moving to New England. And so the loss of the Daughters of Charity was very much the gain of the Religious of Jesus and Mary. This is very sketchy, but I just want to tell you, it's given us a great deal of hope in our province to know first that we have a wonderful archivist in place who is definitely going to move us into the future with hope. So we're very grateful, and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Just to piggyback, now, Sister, I'm not sketchy, but I think I think the beauty of what Sister thought was that this would go to a college that had a French-Canadian studies program, because that's the whole background of these sisters in New England. So it's thanks to Sister Janice that she found the sweet spot for the collection. And now Sister Mary is going to do a précis of the BC conference for us.
Hello, I'm going to try to hold this microphone and talk right into it. So first of all, how is it? Too loud, too soft? You guys can hear in the back? Perfect, okay. I went to the Boston conference, Envisioning the Future of Catholic Religious Archives. Many of you were there. It was a 3-day conference. What was particularly unique and interesting about this conference was the commitment of the people planning it to include leaders, historians like Sister Janice, and archivists, all three together. I think it was the hope of the planners that they would be a third of each. However, that didn't happen. Of the 165 people, there were 102 archivists, no surprise. 28 leaders and 34 historians. Nevertheless, it was wonderful to have that combination. So the purpose of the conference was to begin the discussion of the managing of Catholic religious archives for the future, both women and men. There was no distinction. We know that many congregations are coming to their completion or merger, and how can we identify the issues and provide opportunities to get information, learn about options available in managing the collections. So I'm going to skip a little bit because of the time constraints here, but in general, there were people from 27 states, Canada, Ireland, Scotland, and Rome. So we had quite a national and international representation. The introductory session was composed of, you will not be surprised, an archivist, an historian, and a leader. And they each spoke from their own perspective. The leader realizing the treasure of the story must be preserved. The historians pleading for this to happen because of the need for contextualizing historical research with primary sources. And the archivist saying, yes, yes, to all of this, help us make sure it can happen. I want to focus on two of the presentations. One was the keynote address. 4 months before the conference, the people sent out a questionnaire. And the questionnaire was different for the archivist, the historians, and the leaders. So I don't know what the leaders and historians got, but the one I filled out asked some pretty interesting questions. For example, what did I hope to contribute to the conference? This is a working conference, so expect to be put to work. Number 2 was, how would going to that conference benefit my operation? The third question was, what are threatening problems that are facing my operation? And the fourth question was, what would be the consequence if my archives were to disappear? So that was a rather sobering question. So other questions asked about the size, policy, standardization procedures, storage preservation, and urgent challenges. So the questionnaires were gathered in and analyzed by a very reputable person who does this, and many of you might know her, and her name is Patricia Whitberg. She is from the Center of Applied Research in the Apostolate. So she did the analysis and offered her insights based on the questionnaire, and she began with an historical background, and since she wasn't limited to 10 minutes, she started with the 3rd century, depicting the ups and the downs and the ups and the downs and the cycles of religious life. She offered also sobering statistics about the decline, the numbers going down right now, but in the context of all these hundreds of years, it was like, okay, so we're in that, the valley. But she's also talked about merging congregations, the formation of small and short-lived groups and alternative forms throughout the country. So that kind of gave us a context that helped us relax a little bit. She said, it's paramount that primary sources are safeguarded lest a distorted view prevail. And many of you in this conference have referred to that the mainstream media depict women religious as, and I'll quote her, I would never use these terms, sexually repressed, silly, and vacuous. Whew. So, but think, Flying Nun, Bells of St. Mary, Late Night Catechism. She does make a point. If people don't know the true story, that's all they've got. And she said, and I quote, if we do not tell our own story, we will lose control of it. So and again, you all have made the same point. We have to preserve these primary sources or the authentic story will never be told. The analysis of the survey, briefly I will tell you what they were. The top mentioned item was digitizing. archival holdings, how to do it, when to do it, what to do, etc. The second one was the centralizing or merging or consolidating of archives. That was the second often mentioned concern. The third most important issue was data management. And here you will not be surprised to know there was a sharp difference between the concerns of leaders and the concerns of archivists and historians. Leaders, and some of you are archivists and you were leaders, so you will get this very well. They were concerned about confidentiality and restrictions and the protection of the individual and the congregation, especially regarding potentially libelous information. And the historians said, oh, we want to know everything, let us at it, no restrictions. So we had quite a few discussions about that, and I think those discussions will continue. Less often mentioned, but very important, was the need to recruit and train personnel. We've heard that already this morning again. Who will do it? And we need, I know this is really stupid, but I have this little thing I say, we need kids and crones. We need young people that get the kid, they're not kids, right? But they're young, they're savvy, they're quick to catch on to things technologically. And we need the crones, the old people that hold the institutional memory, the stories, and the culture. And we need us to work together. And I think that's happening. I see it happening at the MAC conference, at the Boston conference, and at this conference. And believe me, it really warms my heart because I feel like we are passing the torch on to very swift runners who they won't drop it, let's put it that way. I'm feeling very confident about that. Also, there was a need for, archivists said that they need personal contacts, mentors, consultants, and peers, but no more formal meetings or formal groups. So that's sort of the summary of the results of the questionnaire. And I think Monte quoted her, I think it was Monte, I'm not sure now, it's beginning to blur. But I want to also quote one thing she said, and that was, if we allow the history of Catholicism to be forgotten as these archives molder in dusty or mildewed boxes, then something very precious will be lost. She said, I am not an archivist, but I'm a sociologist, and I say that what you are here to discuss and act upon is quite simply the most important issue facing Catholicism today. So that all made us feel really good because, we're humble little archivists, but knowing that we are holding onto the stuff of the most important issue is rather, uplifting. No, we're not going to go into the working sessions. Just know that we had working sessions. We broke into small groups. We had recorders and leaders, and all that information is being collected and worked and being written into a white paper, and that will be online. Okay, the only other thing I want to say is there was another panel about charism, and the person that everybody loved was, believe it or not, out of the Department of Management and Organization at Boston College. Who would have thunk, right? And she said that we archivists were CMOs, not CFOs or CEOs, CMOs, Chief Memory Officers. And it was our job to facilitate, collect, preserve, and share the collective memory and spirit of our congregation. And she said, she's just great. And she talked about the Beguines, that medieval women's group, and the Studebaker Car Company in South Bend, and how both of them have, risen again, in a sense, into the culture through metaphor, images, and stories. And that's the stuff of archives, right? Images, stories, and artifacts and metaphors. So there was so much more to say much in 10 minutes, but a lot of this will be online. And I want to just conclude by saying it was a really well organized and fulfilling conference. I think, is Michael Burns here? He can fill you in. He was. Yep, there he is in the back. And I think Father Leahy, the president of Boston College, and many others, Michael and others, were wonderful. And the food was fantastic. And the drinks were free and abundant. And the cod was exquisite. And Do it again, Michael. Do it again. And was going to conclude with repeating what Patricia said, but Monte said it even more succinctly. Think big because you are a big deal. So let us be our motto, that we are a big deal, and let's just remember that and be willing to do what it takes, that the story will not be lost or distorted. Thank you.
Veronica, you posted the link to the video. So actually it's up on ACWR. So if you'd like to see the conference as it was recorded, go to our main website. We are just full of helpful things, aren't we? Okay, and our last speaker, and then you can ask whatever questions you want, is Charlene Martin, and she is really pushing us on this task force to get the third order communities to merge. So here she comes.
Okay, so I was at Boston too, and it was fantastic. The food and the drinks, oh my goodness, but obviously the very inspiring conversations and speeches. So my background is, even though I don't have any initials after my name, I just didn't put them up there. I graduated with my master's in library science in 2013. I was promptly hired, I wouldn't say promptly, a couple months of job searching, and I was hired by the Sisters of St. Francis of the Newman Communities. We are headquartered, or our generalate is in Syracuse, New York. What we really are is an amalgamation of several Franciscan communities. We came together in 2004. So that includes Syracuse, Western Pennsylvania, Western New York, and the Hastings-on-the-Hudson sisters down in Westchester County. Their community dissolved in 2011, so it may not ring a bell as much with everybody. So anyways, I've been working with them since 2013. I currently have 4 collections in my repository, because that's the idea, not my idea necessarily, but my leadership team. They have decided that all collections should come home to the generalates. And so I'm following leadership's directives, and I do take care of each collection. Of course, there's a lot of backlog processing that has to be done, a lot of description, a lot of finding aids. That's my job. And of course, I feel that same sort of, I won't say panic, but the narrow window that a lot of us feel now that we know that a lot of our communities are coming to completion, or at least beginning to face some realities that are hard to face, and that includes me. So that's kind of the background on me. The Third Order Regular Task Force actually began back in 2017. The current president of the Franciscan Federation, Sister Kathy Euler, decided to convene or ask for a task force to be created. And she has recruited various volunteers, such as Dee Gallo, myself, and there are several folks out in the audience here today who are part of this committee. And really, it was just, you wanted to join, you joined. We're doing the best we can to brainstorm and think about what can we do with the collections that we currently are in custody of as our communities come to completion. We don't want, personally I have this terrible vision of myself sitting on the curb with all of my collections, because I'm not going to let all that history go to waste. I'm not going to let it be forgotten, so I will find a home for it. Let's hope that vision never happens and we find a permanent and perpetual repository for them. So that's kind of the idea of the Third Order Regular Task Force right now. Right now we're charism-based, which means we do want to be Franciscan. We're open to both men and women, or I should just say, the collections of men and women Franciscan religious. So we are looking, obviously our vision is to have a centralized repository. I realize it'll be hard. The United States is a big place, and some of us have national missions as well, or sorry, international. But that's the vision, is to have a central repository. Obviously, it would be climate controlled. It would be, maybe not state of the art, but it will be the best we can. And we will all be under one roof. We will share those expenses of operation, of the capital costs of building the repository, or perhaps using a building that's already in existence, but of course we would have to renovate it for archival needs. We would share the staff. And I think we've all heard various models of this. I'm becoming aware of other collaborative models out there, which is really exciting. So it's not just ours, there are many out there. And it's really nice to hear that we're all kind of on the same page somewhat, thinking about our capital costs, our operational costs, our staff costs, but most importantly, the perpetual care of these collections. I'm going to be passing out these flyers, or I'll have them on the end of the table today for anybody who's interested. A big thing that's important to me is that within my congregation, I often hear from my sisters the discouraging thing: who wants to know about our history anyway? It's short-sighted. They've forgotten how many lives they touched through their ministries and their missions. These people are still alive. Maybe it's because I get to talk to them more so now than the sisters do. They call me for reference questions, and they do. They ask about Sister so-and-so. Is she still alive? Where is she? Or I'll see it on Facebook, on social media. These fantastic ladies, quote unquote, they changed my life. And you know what I do? I print those things out. I put them on the wall so my sisters can see them. And I tell them when their former students are asking about them, because they've forgotten. And the thing is that the history is just not about the sisters or the congregation or the community. It's also these children. They were children back in the 40s, back in the 60s. It's their history too. And they have a right to be able to access it, let's say 2050, or maybe it'll be their children's children in 2050. And they'll be like, they should have a right to go back and look, oh my gosh, there's my grandpa. He was at Assumption Academy. And things like that. I mean, that's what I'm trying to stress, especially to my congregation and my community, as they are facing those horrible kind of glimmers, if that's the right word, of completion. It's in the air, right? We're fighting against it, but it's there. I'm talking to them about not just making my archive or their collections valuable to them now, but let's think about the researchers 10, 15 years from now. In fact, I have the researchers now, and I'm so happy to have them to share their story, to share the sister story with them. It's kind of hard to sometimes get that, to spread that excitement. Not everybody loves history, not everybody loves sharing it, but I do the best I can. Again, if anybody's interested, not only in the committee, but perhaps if they don't have time to be on the committee, what the committee has to offer. Certainly, as we make our rounds at these conferences, Malachi McCarthy, he did one in Washington, D.C. about 2 years ago, a year ago, then the one in Boston that Malachi did just recently. We've been taking our notes, and so we're willing to share those. The other thing that we're doing is a feasibility study. We're looking at various collaborative models. In fact, I've been taking notes, in the past few days. We're going to be calling these institutions and talking to their archivists and talking to them about the logistics. How did it go? What was the planning process like? What was the capital cost like? And how is it going now? What were the outcomes, the good, the bad? Because that's part of our process in deciding if it's right for us to move forward with a centralized repository. So other than that, I mean, the other thing is I'm going to see if I can fast forward here. This is a quick list of the different Franciscan communities that are already involved. And of course, you see Dee Gallo's name at the bottom. She's serving as a consultant to us. I'm sure you all know about the why, the financial pressures, the decline in membership, and the thoughts of completion. Those are the big whys. Again, the stages: feasibility study first, identifying capital costs, identifying long-term operational costs. It's great to have this all be realized. How are we taking care of it 20, 50 years down the road? Creating then our phased business plan. And then, of course, once we have everything in order, applying for and obtaining the grant so we can actually do it and set it in motion. Thank you. You tell me when. I can't hear you as well. There you are. So Yes, can you see it very well? Taking a picture. Good. Okay, well, and also too, the great thing is these pamphlets that I have on the back panel, there is a website address to go to this presentation, so you'll be able to see the same information you see right now. At least you'll be able to look at it in your own leisure time. And I'll have the pamphlets up here. I just wanted to say that here's a reality. Out of those are the members of the task force. We currently have at least 1,380 linear feet total. 28% of us expect to receive additional collections in the future. Myself, getting one in November, another community has dissolved, Western Pennsylvania. It doesn't mean that the sisters are deceased. They've become integrated with us in terms of membership, but they're selling their mother house. That collection has to come to me. It's fairly decent size. 77% of the collections are organized. That means all of us on the committee. 48% of the collections are described or indexed by a finding aid or inventory. We've talked about it a lot in the last few days. That's how things get found. Not only by us, by researchers out there in the big world as well. Okay. So again, I just want to get back to just really quickly what you guys can do in the meantime. Optimize your collections for future collaborative repository opportunities. Think about duplicates, get rid of them. I can't believe that I'm doing this, but I am. I'm surprised the duplicates are there. But yeah, silly things like that. Look at your three-dimensional objects. You don't need to keep them. If they're well, I won't say just, if they're awards or trophies or that sort of thing, not trophies, but awards and plaques, they're wonderful, but now we have to think about space considerations. Duplicate them, take pictures, photocopy them, Xerox them, and don't keep the originals. What you see on the far right side is something you do keep. That's an artifact that can speak for itself in an exhibit, so you would keep it. The other two, no. But that's something to help with. Last thing, start thinking about description and inventory. Collection level finding aids. What I mean by that is this. So, very quickly, you give a context, that's the biohistory. Scope and content, and then series and sub-series. And that's all you need to do, collection level finding aid. You can take this as a tool, keep it in a binder in your office, but also give it to places like CRRA, the Catholic Resources Alliance. I forget the whole name for the acronym, but they will put it up on portals. You can find portals on the internet where you can start feeding your finding aids so you can get researchers. The thing about a collection is that you can't keep it alive if people don't want to see it. So, yes, thank you.